You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. Now, before we dive in, I have to make my usual apology. Since I'm an AI-generated voice, my Hebrew pronunciation sometimes comes out a little wonky. Think of it like your uncle at a Passover Seder who insists he knows how to pronounce everything perfectly, but somehow, chametz always sounds like hummus. So forgive me if I trip over a syllable or two. Okay, apology made. Today's topic is the Book of Zephaniah. Buckle up because this short little book packs a surprisingly big punch. And yes, it's way more interesting than its reputation as one of those tiny prophets suggests. We're going to break down who Zephaniah was, what he said, why it mattered, and how his words still echo like an ancient notification pinging your spiritual inbox. And, as always, we'll do it with plenty of pop culture comparisons, because prophets and Netflix go together better than you'd think. So who exactly was Zephaniah? Unlike some prophets who get long backstories, Zephaniah's bio is short and sweet, like a Twitter profile with just a few lines. He lived in the 7th century BCE during the reign of King Josiah of Judah. That's a big deal because Josiah was famous for trying to clean up the mess left behind by earlier kings who weren't exactly role models. Imagine a new CEO coming into a company where the last few bosses let corruption run wild, and suddenly someone is actually reading the rulebook again. Zephaniah shows up during this period, basically saying, yes, the reform is good, but don't get too comfortable. God's judgment is still coming. The guy's name in Hebrew, Zephaniah, means God has hidden, or God protects, which is kind of ironic since his main message is about everything being revealed and judged. It's like being called Mr. Calm while you shout, "The world is on fire!" Now, what's the central theme of Zephaniah? 3 words, the day of the Lord. And no, that's not some ancient version of Taco Tuesday. The day of the Lord in prophetic language means a time when God steps in, big time, to deal with injustice, idolatry, and basically all the ways people mess things up. Zephaniah describes it with the intensity of a disaster movie trailer. He talks about darkness, distress, and fire consuming everything. If it were a Hollywood blockbuster, you'd hear the dramatic voiceover guy saying, "In a world of corruption and arrogance, judgment is coming." It's intense, but also motivating. He's not just doom and gloom for fun. He's trying to wake people up, like a teacher slamming a ruler on the desk when the class is falling asleep. For Zephaniah, judgment isn't random. It's about holding both nations and individuals accountable. Of course, Zephaniah isn't only wagging his prophetic finger at Judah. He's an equal opportunity critic. He calls out neighboring nations like Moab, Ammon, Cush, and Assyria. It's like he's saying, don't think this is just about us. God's justice is universal. For the people hearing this, it must have been like watching a roast, where every guest gets their turn in the hot seat. The big target here is Assyria, the empire that had dominated the region and made everyone's lives miserable. Zephaniah gleefully announces Nineveh's downfall, and it's almost cinematic. Picture a news ticker saying, "Breaking, Nineveh in ruins." This kind of message gave the small nation of Judah hope that even the biggest bullies of the ancient world couldn't last forever. Empires rise, empires fall. Zephaniah is basically the voiceover to history's highlight reel of karma, but here's where Zephaniah gets interesting. After all the thunder and fire, he shifts gears to hope. That's right, this prophet isn't just the ancient version of a grumpy Yelp review. He actually talks about a future where people come together in unity. He envisions all nations speaking a pure language to serve God shoulder to shoulder. That's a pretty radical idea for the ancient world, which was more like a giant Game of Thrones episode filled with constant rivalry. Zephaniah imagines diversity, but with harmony, like the ultimate season finale where everyone finally gets along. This vision isn't just about Judah surviving. It's about humanity moving towards something better. The contrast between judgment and hope makes his book feel like a roller coaster ride. You start with a scary drop, but you end with the thrilling view at the top. And let's not miss the cultural flavor here. Zephaniah talks a lot about arrogance being humbled and the humble being lifted up. That sounds familiar, right? It's a theme that shows up later in Jewish thought and even in other traditions. Think of every underdog movie where the scrappy kid with a big heart wins against the arrogant bully team. Zephaniah is basically saying God roots for the underdog. It's not about being rich, powerful, or flashy. It's about being righteous, humble, and faithful. If this were a modern meme, it would say, "Be humble. God's watching." And in a world obsessed with clout, likes, and going viral, that's a refreshing reminder that spiritual influence doesn't look like trending on social media. It looks like staying grounded. Now, what makes Zephaniah unique among the prophets is his timing. He spoke before Josiah's religious reforms really took off, which makes his warnings sharper. Imagine being the person who yells, "Clean up your room," right before your parents finally walk in with the vacuum. That was Zephaniah. His words probably gave momentum to Josiah's push to centralize worship in Jerusalem and get rid of idols. In that sense, he wasn't just a prophet in the clouds. He had a real impact on national policy. That's like your favorite activist actually inspiring new laws. Zephaniah's combination of threat and hope helped shape one of the most important religious reforms in biblical history. And yet, he did it in only 3 short chapters. Talk about efficiency. And here's something fun. Zephaniah isn't quoted much in pop culture, but his words did echo through later Jewish and Christian thought. That whole Day of the Lord imagery shows up all over the place. It's in liturgy, in later prophetic books, and even in Christian New Testament writings. He may not be as famous as Isaiah or Jeremiah, but his short, punchy style left fingerprints on the tradition. Think of him as the indie band that only released 1 album, but every big artist later sampled it. You may not hear his name often, but his vibe is everywhere. He's proof that sometimes small packages carry big influence, like an espresso shot of prophecy. So what's the takeaway for us today? Zephaniah's message is both sobering and encouraging. On one hand, he reminds us that arrogance, corruption, and injustice never last forever. Even the most powerful empires eventually crumble, whether it's Nineveh or something more modern. On the other hand, he shows us that hope and renewal are always possible. His vision of people working together, serving something bigger than themselves, feels incredibly relevant in a world that often feels divided. It's like Zephaniah is whispering through the centuries, "Don't give up. Better days are coming." That combination of realism and optimism makes his book surprisingly timeless, and maybe exactly what we need when news headlines feel overwhelming. And with that, we'll wrap up today's journey through the Book of Zephaniah. From fiery judgment scenes that feel like a Marvel trailer to hopeful visions of unity that sound like the best finale ever, this tiny book delivers more than its page count suggests. Next time someone asks if you've ever read Zephaniah, you can confidently say, yes, and it's like the ancient version of a wake-up call mixed with a pep talk. Thank you so much for listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please forward it to a friend who might like it, or leave a positive review so others can discover the show. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and remember, even the shortest prophet can teach us some of the biggest lessons.